Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel, and got some great things to show you today. We're going to pick up the last half of the 1890 novel, Barron's Marvelous Underground Journey. Now, in case you missed it yesterday, we did a part one, and I'll go ahead and put that part in the pinned comment so you guys can see it in case you missed it. Fascinating read for that first part of that. We didn't read the whole book, but we pulled out some specific pages that related directly to what is going on right now and some of our more recent research. Now, one of you made an amazing discovery about a Barron's dog, Bolger. Let me make sure we're connected first. Saying we don't have... Okay, everything looks good on this end. Tom says we're live. Good. And one of you made an amazing discovery about Barron's dog, Bolger, in the book Barron's Underground Journey. And you had heard that before. Well, what you found, what I found after digging into this was that there were lots of similarities between the Wizard of Oz in the book, but of course, the Barron's Underground Journey came out about 10 years before the Wizard of Oz book was written. And lo and behold, the actor who played the Scarecrow in the film The Wizard of Oz, that came out in 1939, years later, his name, as you can see here, is Ray Bolger. The same name as the dog in Barron's Underground Journey. Now, here's some screenshots of Ray Bolger as the Scarecrow. Everybody remembers this. Very interesting, right? The crossovers. Now, both the Wizard of Oz film and Gulliver's Travels both came out in 1939. As you can see here, here's the Wizard of Oz, 1939. And here is Gulliver's Travel as well. That came out in 1939. Now, we might decode this 1939 Gulliver's Travels. Why? Because the background images of this film were painted by the same muralist, the same artist that painted Mar-a-Lago, as well as Tesla's New Yorker, as well as Edison Hotel. So there's something to this. This time travel element, going into different worlds. That's what the theme of these things is all about. And there must be some truth to this when you connect it to people like Edison, Trump, and Tesla, and the experimentation that they were working on to reach beyond the veil. Now, there's something interesting about these two films, Wizard of Oz and Gulliver's Travels, both releasing in 1939. The Wizard of Oz released on the 237th day of the year. As you can see right here, let me show you. August 25th, 1939, which is the 237th day of the year. Why is that important? Well, that's the beast number, room 237. And the significance of the release dates of these films is important. This is Gulliver's Travels, and it released on the winter solstice, December 22nd, the birth date of all the false gods, Tammuz, the birth date of Sol Invictus, Dionysus, all the false gods, Apollo, Apollyon, birthday on this date. So there's something to this. So now on yesterday's show, we read in the book that Barron's journey to the Hollow Earth began in the North Ural Mountains. Let me pull that up. I've got the PDF file for the book, if I can find what I did with it. There it is. And as you can see here, according to the learned Don Fum's manuscript, the portals to the world within a world were situated somewhere in northern Russia. Possibly so, he thought, from all indications, somewhere on the westerly slope of the upper Urals. So I began to dig into this a little bit deeper. Well, it just so happens, we're going to go into Google Earth now. It just so happens that the super deep borehole in Kola, which is right here, let's zoom in on this, is very near the Ural Mountains. Here's the Ural Mountains here. They run north to south. And again, according to the book, the upper Urals, which is at the top here, and the westerly slope, as you heard it described there, which would be all this over here. And here is the Kola borehole. Now, we did a video on this super deep borehole last year. Many of you will remember when we were looking into these portals into the earth. And there were many things talked about with this particular borehole. And one of those things was that they had heard voices coming up out of the earth. Here are all the different things that they actually discovered that did not make scientific sense as they were drilling this deep well into the earth, the deepest well ever to be dug into the earth. Now, in the book, they have a giant's well, is what they call it. This is the first leg of the journey for Barron in the book. He goes through what's called the giant's well. And here we are with the Kola super deep borehole, also called a well. Now, what other claims were made about this particular hole that is very close to the entrance described in the book? Well, these voices coming up through here. Now, these were anecdotal reports. They never recorded these sounds. But it says here there was a persistent rumor that the drilling ended in 1992 because scientists pierced a super hot cavity and heard the screams of damned souls. Of course, they write it off as not likely. For that, they probably needed to actually reach the mantle. I guess they never did reach the mantle. What else did they find? Well, something else seems to coincide with the book. There's a lot of water down there. Hot mineralized water was found almost everywhere along the drill path. Everyone figured that the granite would be as dry as a stone. Who says you can't get water from a rock? So, there was a bunch of gases down there, unexpected gases. They're not supposed to be at that depth. Unexpected helium, hydrogen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide. Now, the book describes gas that was used to keep things warm down there and to basically power this underworld. They actually used methane gas in the book. So they knew in the book that there were these gases going very, very deep into the earth. So they also found these creatures. It's not mentioned in this particular article, but they found live creatures inside the water where there should be none. Subterranean creatures alive miles beneath the earth. So, interesting nonetheless. Now let's go back into Google Earth and look at the proximity of the North Ural Mountains to this borehole. The western upper Urals. Now, this looks kind of close, but it's actually not very close. Okay, it's probably about 800 miles, 500 to 800 miles between the Kola borehole and the Ural Mountains here. But this is the Arctic. Both descriptions are in the Arctic, as you can see here. The ice begins. Most of this, a lot of this is frozen up here. There's nothing else up here. And when we begin to zoom out, you can actually see the proximity with respects to the rest of the plane here. So it is somewhat close to the description. Now, how could Ingersoll Lockwood have known this in 1890? Well, that's up to you to decide. Now, there's more to this because this gets very interesting. Let's go into and look at the Kola borehole. I marked it here on the map. Let's zoom it up, and I'll tell you what that red line is about too in a second. There's something about this site where they decided to begin to dig. And of course, this site is no longer working. It was closed in 1992, as we read, but look at what we have here. They chose the shape of a cross as the site of where they would dig into hell. Why? Why would you choose this shape? Well, we know why. Not everybody that wears a cross or donates money to a good cause or does all the things that people like to brag about some of the most evil people in the world, it doesn't mean that they're good, right? It does not mean that they are good. There are such things as false Christs and false crosses and false things. And this is no different. Digging into the depths of hell. Now, you're probably wondering what this red line is. People are probably asking, what is this? Well, it extends from halfway across the earth, from the pyramid of the sun and the temple of Quetzalcoatl at Teotihuacan. Let's zoom this out and follow this red line, because it forms an alignment of sorts. The alignment seems to follow the avenue of this ancient place all the way across the earth. As we follow the line, you can see it goes right through the center of Greenland. And all the way down to Teotihuacan, Mexico. Now, for those that don't understand alignments, they're basically alignments to particular, I guess the word is features within a structure. And this is where we can begin to look and see how things could possibly line up. Now, remember, the line goes right through this volcano here, as you can see. As we zoom into the pyramid of the sun, as well as the pyramid, the temple of Quetzalcoatl, as you can see here. And this becomes the avenue. Now, the alignment is not exact, but this is the temple of Quetzalcoatl. And this avenue runs up through next to the pyramid of the sun, as you can see here. And there's the red line. I think this is the pyramid of the moon here. As you can see, the alignment is very close, pointing halfway around the earth to the portal entrance to hell, revealed by the god of the underworld himself, Quetzalcoatl, pointing the way. Interesting, right? Now, let's keep digging into this book. I think we got about halfway through the book yesterday. And so we're going to keep digging into this book. Barron's Underground Journey. We're going to start at page 136. This is a pretty... Okay, there it goes. All right. Now, on this particular page, the underground people tell the story of how they ended up in the world within a world. I'm going to close Google Earth here so that we can make sure this works correctly. Early history of the the sodopsies, as related by Barrel, how they were driven to take refuge in the underworld, and how they came upon the Marble Highway. Now, in yesterday's show, we talked about similarities between the plot line, the storyline of this particular book and The Wizard of Oz. And of course, this book predated The Wizard of Oz. There was a yellow brick road called the Marble Highway. It was actually a rainbow brick road. In the book, there was a small dog, just like in The Wizard of Oz. There was tornado twisting references, just like in The Wizard of Oz. The whole thing was repeated. Then it talks about here their discovery of natural gas, which yields them light and warmth, and of nature's magnificent treasure house. How they replaced their tattered garments and began to build the city of silver. The strange misfortunes that came upon them, and how they rose superior to them, terrible as they were. And no doubt, dear friends, you would be glad to hear something about the early history of the sodopsies, who they were, where they came from, and how they happened to find their way down into the world within a world. At least this was the way I felt after I had been presented to the learned Barrel. And so the next time I called upon him, I waited patiently for him to finish reading the 4 books in front of him. And then I said, "Be pleased, dear master, tell me something concerning the early history of thy people, and explain to me how they came to make their way down into this underground world." "Ages and ages ago," wrote the learned Barrel, "my people lived upon the shores of a beautiful land with a vast ocean to the north of it. And in those days they had the same sense as the other people of the upper world. It was a very fair land indeed, so fair that in the words of the ancient chronicles, the sun looked in vain for a fairer. Its rivers were deep and broad, its plains were rich and fertile, and its mountains stored full of silver and gold and copper and tin. And so easily mined were these metals that our people became famous as metal workers." Now, for those of you that know the story of the fallen angel, the first metal workers were the Canaanites, and they learned from the fallen angels. So deft in their workmanship that the other nations from far and near came to us for swords and shields. Does this ring a bell from the book of Enoch? Breastplates, swords, shields, all of that was taught by the fallen angels. And spearheads and suits of armor and table service and armlets and bracelets, and above all, for lamps most gloriously chased and carved to hang in their palaces and temples. And so we were very happy until one terrible day, the great round world gave a twist, and we were turned away from the sun, so that its rays went slantingly over our heads and gave us no warmth. They're basically describing some kind of an ice age. "Ah me, I could weep now," exclaimed the learned Barrel, "after all these centuries, when I think of the cruel fate that overtook my people. In a few months, the whole face of our land was so covered with ice and snow, and our cattle died, and many of our people too, before they could weave thick cloth to keep their delicate bodies from the pinching cold. But this was not all. The great blue ocean, which had until then dashed its warm waves and white foam up against our shores, now breathed its icy breath full upon us, driving us into our cellars to escape its fury. And in a few brief months, to our horror, there came drifting down upon us fields and mountains of ice. Sounds like the I Pet Goat 2 landscape, doesn't it? With the snowdrifts and ice, which the tempestuous waters cast up against our shores with deafening crash. To remain there meant death, swift and terrible. So the command was given to abandon homes and firesides and escape to the southward. And this most of them did, but it would so happen that several hundred families belonging to the Metal Workers Guild, who knew the underground passages to the mines, as foresters know the pathless wood, had taken refuge in the vast underground caverns with all the goods they could carry. Now, this is happening right now. All these boreholes and drilling going on, all these sounds happening from under the ground, and booms that people are hearing. This is these people digging underground and creating these places under the earth. The Bible says that in the end, they will pray for the earth to fall on them because they will be stuck down there. How do you think the earth is going to fall on them unless they're underground? Poor deluded creatures, they thought that this sudden coming of the winter blast of the blinding snow and vast floating fields of ice was but a freak of nature, and that in a few months the old warmth and the old sunshine would come back again. Alas, months went by, and their supply of food was almost exhausted, and the entrances to the mines were closed by gigantic blocks of ice, cemented into one great mass by the snow which the gray clouds had sifted down upon them. There was no escape that way. Their only hope was to make their way underground to some portal to the upper world. So with lighted torches, but with hearts plunged in darkness of despair, they kept on their way when one day or one night, they knew not which, their leaders suddenly came upon a broad street of marble, opened by nature's own hands. The broad street, the Broadway, the wide gate. It was skirted by a softly flowing river that swarmed with fish and scales and shells and skin. And here our people halted to eat and drink and rest. And while one of their number was striking his flint on one occasion to make a fire to cook a meal, to his surprise and delight, a tongue of flame darted up from the rocky floor and continued to burn, giving light and warmth to them. As they had brought their tools, their drills, chisels, and files, engravers, and blowpipes with them in their carts and wagons, they made haste to fit a pipe to this opening in the rock and set up a cluster of lights. With food and water and warmth and light, their hearts grew lighter, especially as they soon discovered that in many of the vast caverns, gigantic mushrooms grew in the wildest profusion. The wisest of them, continued the learned Brow, at once made up their minds that there must be reservoirs of this gas further along in this beautiful marble highway. So day by day they pushed further into the world within a world, halting every now and then to set up a lighthouse, as they called it. After advancing several leagues, the exploring party, upon lighting a cluster of gas jets, were stricken almost speechless with wonder at finding themselves upon the very sill of a towering portal, opening into a succession of vast chambers, some with flat ceilings, some arched, some domed. Upon the floors and of the walls lay and hung inexhaustible quantities of pure silver. So there's the story of how humanity ended up in these netherworlds. This is the story that they give, of course, right? Now let's skip forward several pages here, because they begin to explain how these people of the underworld lost their ability to see and hear. And it also describes how they learn how to communicate a different way, by touch and a silver cord. And almost like this early telephone type of communication, where they've got this piece that they hold up to their bodies connected by this silver cord, like, you know, how children play with two cups and connect a wire to. Well, this is how they communicate. Now, they also are going to describe here an interesting admission about men ruling other men and the right-left paradigm. Let's start reading here. Some men will fish all day and not have a bite. And some people will try their whole lives to catch happiness and not get any more than a nibble. They don't use the right kind of bait. Let them try a kind act, a live one. There was something I wanted to ask of the learned Barrowbrow. So the next call I made on him, I put this question to him. Is it possible, learned master, that thy people have absolutely no guide, no overseer, no rulers? The great scholar of Formifolk ceased reading the 4 books which lay opened before him, one each hand, one under each foot, as I handed him my silver tablet. Little Baron, was his reply, if there were only a bramble big enough for all you people of the upper world to jump into, and if you could only get rid of your ears too, you would soon be rid of your rulers who oppress you, who prey upon you, for no one would have any desire to be a ruler if there was no one left to look at him, and if he couldn't hear what the flatterers said about him. Now this is very revealing and telling, because if you could sum it up in one president who was all about vanity and flattery and bragging, we would all agree that that would be Trump. The very book is exposing the evil. Let's keep reading here. Vanity is the soil that rulers spring from, as the mushrooms spring from the rich loam of our dark caverns. They pretend that it is the exercise of power that they are so fond of. Believe them not. It is the gratification of their own vanity, and nothing else. If it were only in thy power to say to every man who itched to be a ruler, well and good, brother, a ruler thou shalt be, but bear in mind, weak man, that when thou hast donned thy gaudy, look, they even use his name here, when thou hast donned thy gaudy uniform, and mounted thy gaily caparisoned steed, when thou ridest at the head of troop and cavalcade, with 10,000 armed men following thee on foot, as slaves their master, and the plaudits of the foolish multitude rend the air, no eye shall witness the splendor of thy triumph, no ear catch a sound of the deafening cheers. Take my word for it, little Baron, no one would want to be a ruler anymore. Where there are no rulers, little Baron, continued the learned Barrowbrow, there can be no followers. Where there are no followers, there can be no quarreling. When it becomes necessary in our nation, we form the great circle for deliberation. Each man writes out what he thinks on his tablet. Then the opinions are read and counted, and the majority rules. But we form the great circle only in times of urgent need. Generally speaking, the smaller circles answer all the purposes. In fact, the family circle is in most cases quite sufficient. So this is how they handle problems. They have a voting system which is incorruptible, where everyone gives their opinion. I touched first Barrowbrow's heart in token of my gratitude for many things which he had taught me, and then the back of his head to bid him good night. You may imagine his and my delight, dear friends, when the wise Bolger raised himself up upon his hind legs, with his right paw also thanked learned Barrowbrow. Fortunate the traveler, wrote the learned Sodopsy, attended by so wise and watchful a companion. So they are basically revealing the method by which they enslave each other and allow ourselves to be ruled by men. Now, the Bible can seem to contradict itself, but if you read closely and you step outside of the paradigm that our Christian religions have given us in terms of how to read the Bible and interpret what it's really saying, nowhere in the Bible does God really approve of kings. In fact, the very first kings mentioned in the Bible, he warned against. And he told the ancient Israelites who begged for a king, a representative on earth, he said, if this is what you want, I'll give it to you because I'm about free will. But understand that this is what will happen. They will take your sons and daughters. You will pay money. And he went on and listed all the things that would happen if you open the door to wanting a king on earth. And that's exactly what happened. Now, maybe one of you guys can help me out in the chat and cite the verses that I'm speaking from in the Old Testament about God's warning about kings. Now, we get confirmation, do we not? When Jesus was offered the kingdoms of the world by the person who runs the kingdoms of the world, which is the devil. Now, many people will use some of the scriptures in Romans to say that we're supposed to be in subjection to these kings. And my answer to you is these are simply mistranslated. They're mistranslated intentionally to put you in submission to evil. But if you were to read the Bible in its entirety and look at Jesus' example and how he rejected rulership of these evil kingdoms, then the truth would emerge. But very few people can do that because the church has sold us out. They went with this compromise of the interpretation of the scripture that allows the door to be open to subjection of God's people to an evil government. All governments are evil by definition. Jesus did not want to rule these kingdoms, and it's for good reason. Now, let's keep going with this because there's more. This is a huge file, so it takes a second for these pages to load up here. Okay. Now, in this part, Barron passes from kingdom to kingdom until the end of the book. And one of the last kingdoms is this ice world. Let's get down to that part here. Now, this ice world is bizarre because everyone's frozen. They're like ice humanoids that he finds himself with. And basically, Barron gets himself in trouble with these people because he frees this monkey that was trapped in a cube, in an ice cube. It's crazy. So he devises this plan to try to dig another portal back to the surface. Let's read this. While sitting one day, lost in thought over the very serious problem which I found myself called upon to solve, an idea struck me. I had noticed that in the meat quarries, the workmen often made use of sounding rods, which were long pieces of polished bone, ending in flint tips. A Colty-Warpian quarryman, by dexterously twisting this rod, was able to bore a hole 6 feet deep or more into the solid bed of ice. When desirous of ascertaining the position of a carcass in the meat quarry, and it occurred to me that by piercing the portals of ice, which close their various corridors I have spoken of, possibly Bolger's keen scent might recognize that current of air, which would have in it the odor of earth and rock. In other words, where was I? Scroll down here. Make choice for me of the portal which opened on that corridor leading away from the icy domain of King Gelidus, and not merely into some outlying chamber of his kingdom. His frigid majesty could not object to such experiments, for the law only forbade the hewing of openings large enough for the hewer to pass through. King Gelidus and half of a dozen of his courtiers, looking stern and frigid and conversing in freezing tones, were present to see the experiment tried. Methought their icy lips clacked together with satisfaction at my request. One portal. So basically, he convinces the king to open up this portal to dig back to the surface. Then, as we begin to close in on the last pages of this book, Barron enters the world of the happy forgetters, they're called, and they're a race of people who don't even remember their names. Let's read. Accustomed as I was to meet all sorts of people on my travels in the four corners of the globe, I determined to make bold enough to interpret the gentleman's meditations and wish him good morrow. Whom have I had the pleasure of meeting in this beautiful section of the world within a world? The man looked at me in a dazed sort of way and replied, I really don't know, I'm happy to say. But, sir, thy name? I insisted. Forgot it years ago, was his remarkable answer. But surely, sir, I explained rather testily, thou art not the sole inhabitant of this beautiful underworld. Thou hast kinsmen, wife, family? Oh, kinsman, sorry. The vernacular here is just, bear with me, you guys. This is not the way we speak now, but this is from 1890. Aye, gentle stranger, he replied in slow and measured tones. There are people further along the shore, and they are good, dear souls, although I have forgotten their names. And I have, too, a very faint recollection that two of these people are sons of mine. Stop. No, their names are gone from me, too. I forgot them the day my own name slipped from my mind. So basically, he runs into these people called the rattlebrains, and it's because their brains have shrunken inside of their heads, and they've lost their minds. They can't remember anything. And then he remembers reading about these people in the book by Don Thumb, and he remembers they are called the happy forgetters or the rattlebrains. Now, how does this relate to now? Well, this is what they want to do to us. They want us to be mindless followers. Okay. Who cares what your name is? Who cares? You don't have to own anything. Just let us take care of you. That's the goal. Now let's keep reading here. These last few pages I have pulled up here. So these rattlebrain people, this is the last, I guess you can call it frontier, before Barron emerges on the surface of the earth. And they order him into this barrel-like elevator device. And it turns and basically introduces him into this wind tunnel. This blows him through this tunnel, and then he enters this water ride kind of thing, like a log ride, and that shoots him back to the surface through a spouting well, they call it. Let's read this, these last few pages here. The blast might toss me violently on my face and possibly break an arm for me or injure me in some serious way. All at once, the deep pealing forth of the organ-like tone ceased, and in its stead came the awful sound of rushing water. Before I had time to think, it was upon me, striking me like a terrific blow from some gigantic fist wearing a boxing glove. Next instant, I was caught up like a cork on a mountain torrent, swaying from side to side, twisted, turned, sucked down, and cast up again, rolled over and over, tossed and tumbled, rolled along like a wheel, arms and legs the spokes. Wonderful to relate, I did not lose consciousness as this terrible current shot me like a stick of timber through a flume, whither I knew not, only that the speed and volume went over and increasingly until the last tumultuous torrent filled the tunnel and robbed me of light, breath, of life, and everything, including my faithful and loving Bolger. How long it lasted, this fearful ride in the arms of these mad waters, rushing as if for life or death through this narrow bore, I know not. Now it's interesting because they call it a bore, just like the borehole, right? I only know that my ears were suddenly assailed with mighty whiz and rush of waters, as through the nozzle of some gigantic hose, and I was shot out into the glorious sunshine, out into the grand free open air of the upper world, and sent flying up toward the dear blue sky, with its flecks of fleecy cloudlets, and Bolger some 20 feet ahead of me, and that then, with a gracefully curved flight through the soft and balmy air of harvest time, we both were gently dropped into a quiet little lake, nestled at the foot of a hillside yellow with ripened corn. In a moment or so, we had swum ashore, Bolger wanted to halt and shake the water from his thick coat. So here they are. He finally arrives on the surface of the ground, and he's greeted by the Russians, of course. These are the last few pages here. I paid no attention to the question. I was thinking of something else of more importance to me, to wit, my splendid achievement, the marvelous underground journey I had just completed, fully 500 miles in length, passing completely under the Ural Mountains. After a short stay at the nearest village, I engaged the best guide that was to be had, and crossing the Urals by the pass in the most direct line, re-entered Russia and made haste to join the first government train on its way to St. Petersburg. So that's pretty much the end of the book. And there wasn't much else to really see. But I will put a link to this PDF file if you guys are interested in digging deeper into Barron's marvelous underground journal. I think there was a lot of information within this book that revealed the method by which these people have enslaved us, and some of the scientific discoveries, secret discoveries, covert discoveries that they use to enslave us. And of course, their association to the fallen angels, the ones who are in control at the top of our governments. Let's go into the chat here. Now, tomorrow's show, we will be doing a special show on some of the headlines, but also talking about gee whiz. Okay, and what that means for the future. Okay, everybody's focused on the physical effects, but understand that the rich live right alongside of us, don't they? The controllers. Not to say they can't turn on and turn off different sections and places and aim this thing different places. Of course, they can do that, but if you're in a rural setting, most likely you're far away from these towers and how they operate. Okay. The more important aspect to gee whiz is the electronic fence, the electric kingdom, and enforcement of unfair laws that will now be able to be done with the blink of an eye. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow. That is the true threat here, because here's what's going to happen. Right now, the system is inefficient, but in a few short hours, the system will be like Skynet from Terminator. It will have 100% efficiency in tracking things down, identifying threats, and all of those other things. So we'll get into that tomorrow. We did a documentary on Terminator and Skynet. I'll probably link that into the pinned comments. You guys can see that if you're interested in how all this works. But you guys, this is not good. Not good at all. And they've been chomping at the bit to get this thing up and running, because here's the thing. Obviously, they have an agenda, right? Obviously, they have no problem trying to induce us and threaten us into what they want us to do, right? We've already seen it on display over the last 2 years. They will go against the grain of what society wants. Even if you're telling them, I don't want to be saved by you. I don't want what you're giving us. They will still try to force it on you. The only thing stopping them from doing it is enforcement. Believe me, if they had the ability to enforce half this stuff, they would be doing it yesterday. And this is what will happen when Skynet becomes self-aware. Yes, Borehole, it is Skynet. Not like, it is. Now, we've been talking about this for like 4 years. I remember the first Terminator decodes that we did. Okay. And little do you know, the Terminator films are biblical films. What are you talking about, Casey? Well, we broke it all down, the names of the characters in the Terminator films, all the way down to the Pharaoh riding down through the parted Red Sea, which was the canal, in the semi-truck. Semi is code for hybrid. And the black semi tries to drive underneath the overpass, which says a 9 and an 11 on the overpass. And the top is chopped off. That's the Pharaoh being crushed by the closing Red Sea. As John Connor along with the Terminator, the other Terminator, make their escape. And it goes so much deeper than that. So let's go into the chat here. Okay, I'm just reading your guys' comments. Okay, so someone says, gee whiz has been online in New York and nothing to see here. What do you mean nothing to see here? I don't know if you checked, but the people in New York are very under the thumb of the government there. And they are passing things and enforcing things. They don't talk about it on the news. Of course, they're not going to talk about how efficiently they can enforce things. But don't you think it's weird that some of these businesses who tried to stay open were immediately identified, targeted, and visited within minutes of trying to do what they were doing? That all probably links into this gee whiz thing. They have 100% efficiency in enforcement. This is why people don't stand a chance. Why do you think so many people are leaving? Because they don't want to live in that. Or you're going to knock on your door because you didn't go by a law. Why do you think they're able and so emboldened to pass these very unfair laws in New York? It's because they can enforce them. Because of Skynet. So, all right. You know, I see this blah, blah, Blasio guy come on, and I'm like, what is this guy talking about? Like, you can't do that, but yet he can, and he does. They don't seem to care that people are leaving. They don't seem to care that people are angry about it. It doesn't matter to them because they will track you down like Terminators. There's no escape when you live in Skynet, and that's where the whole country is going. The only escape is the exodus, getting out of Skynet's control. And we saw this in the Terminator films. We saw it on display. Once you get outside of their grid, the most dangerous places in the Terminator series were very close to the control centers, weren't they? It was like a mission out of Mission Impossible. They would go into the control centers where the machines ruled everything, and they had complete efficiency and ability to track them down. So I'll put a link to that documentary. It's a really good one. I hope I still have it up. But it's basically Terminator and how it's actually very real. All right. State elite cities. Yes, Carlene. Everything, if you think about the English language, everything is a play on these words, okay? They use words in reverse. They use wordplay, spelling, casting spells with these names that they give things. And it has power. It has to have power. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. So, I guess there was a collapsed building. Yes, it's more critical than ever before to know Christ, Uncle Paranoia. That's the only thing that matters, okay? The only reason why we come on here every day and expose the enemy is so people realize that Christ is the only way. A lot of people think they don't need Christ. They're living in this utopia mindset, where they start depending on the system for answers instead of Jesus. And these are Christian people doing this. Fully deceived. And because they don't know. They don't know that they need Christ in the real way that we have realized that we need him. Okay? So, anyway, I love each and every one of you guys. Thanks for showing up today. And we'll be back on here tomorrow with some headlines, talk more about Terminator and Skynet and it becoming self-aware and going live tomorrow, It's a huge day. And understand that this wasn't just Bo Jivin that made this happen. We had Thump was bipartisan, signed Gee Whiz and beyond during the first lockdown, which was really cringy. Why would you do that during the first lockdown of the United States in pretty much the history of the country? Why would you do that? It's because he knew that we would all need to be brought to our knees. And so this is just a continuation by Bo Jivin to complete what they're both working on. And I told you guys this was at the top priority of how things were going to work, that they were building this wall, building this electronic virtual fence, and that this would be the end, the beginning of the end to resistance. Okay. We're literally going to be like in the film, running from junk pile to junk pile, trying to avoid the machines. And they will say it's for public health and safety that they have to do this. Weed out those pesky anti-Pokemon sticker people who we just can't end this spamdemic because of a few people that just don't want to play along. Forget about your autonomy and forget about your body. Forget about your right to fight something naturally. Forget about that. That doesn't matter anymore. All that matters to them is compliance and control. And if you do not comply, then the machines will get you. That's where this is headed, if you really want to know the truth. It doesn't matter which president's in power, red or blue, they're all in on it. And until people wake up to that and stop choosing someone to save them, we will always be our own oppressors. I love each and every one of you. Thanks for coming today. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care and be safe.